All I know is that it's contrary to international law to have 5 years in prison for an innocent Australian exercising their right to return. If Mr. Slater were to hop on a yacht from the Maldives and land in Australia, he'd be prosecuted for an offence that the Australian Parliament has never agreed. It's hidden in section 479 of the Biosecurity Act. I don't know that any MP actually got to read it, but it allows the Minister of Health a virtual dictatorial power to declare a law and have Australian citizens incriminated by it. And that, it seems to me, contrary to the whole idea of a democracy, which is set up by our Constitution, which provides that individuals should not lose their liberty unless they've contravened a law which has been debated in and agreed by Parliament. So it's an extraordinary situation.
Is the right to entry a right of citizenship, and does the criminalisation of Australians returning from India amount to a suspension of that right?
It's certainly a right, and it's been for many hundreds of years. Let me read you a passage from Magna Carta. Magna Carta says, "It shall be lawful for any man to leave and return to our kingdom unharmed and without fear." So as long ago as 1215, that right was declared. It was declared in Australia by the Whitlam government. You probably won't remember the extraordinary case of Wilf Burchett, who was a brilliant Australian journalist, first person into Hiroshima. He reported the horrors of Hiroshima, lost his passport somewhere in the ashes, and because he was a communist, the Menzies government banned him and wouldn't give him another passport. His father died, the Gorton government wouldn't allow him in, and an extraordinary philanthropist called Gordon Barton flew him in a private plane, and they couldn't touch him. He said, "I'm born in Australia." And one of the first acts of the Whitlam government was to give him back his passport and to declare that Australians were entitled to return to the land of their citizenship. So that's, if you like. And then a few years later, Malcolm Fraser, his government signed the International Covenant, which gives the specific right of anyone to re-enter their native land. So I think we can say fairly clearly that this should be a privilege of citizenship, and in Australia it isn't.
The government's central argument is firstly that these laws were actually passed democratically and in fact were bipartisan by the Parliament, and that we're in an extraordinary emergency situation, that they're trying to avoid a third wave and actually save Australian lives, clearly within our borders. What do you make of those arguments?
Yeah. Well, I think they're separate arguments. The first argument is, yes, it was nodded through. There was no debate. I've had a look at the Hansard, and there was no debate at all. I don't think that members of Parliament or their staff managed to get to section 479, and they certainly didn't raise an eyebrow, and they should have, because it gives a dictatorial power to the health minister, in effect, to incriminate innocent people. And so that takes care of that. It should, as a criminal law, be properly debated and agreed. The second issue, of course, is that I don't take issue with banning commercial flights, tourist flights from a virus hotspot. That's sensible. What is unacceptable, I think many Australians find ethically, is the fact that 9,000 Australians in peril, some of them vulnerable. The chief medical officer accepts that in a worst case scenario, some of them will die, not being rescued. There's little Taiwan, much more threatened by China than we are, sending off mercy flights to pick up the Taiwanese who are in India. Why aren't we doing the same? I mean, we should bring them back to quarantine not to jail.
What do you make of the comment by ex-cricketer Michael Slater, who said that the Prime Minister has blood on his hands in relation to this issue? Does he?
Well, in fact, as a matter of law, it's the Minister for Health, because it's his power and his power alone. It's not, everyone's blaming or saying today, oh, it's the Chief Medical Officer who advised us. Well, the Chief Medical Officer has no power at all and shouldn't be advising outside his role. He, I imagine, subject to the Hippocratic Oath of first do no harm, and he has a duty, obviously, to give the facts, the statistics, but he doesn't make a decision. It's a political decision made by the minister. And it's unacceptable, and it wouldn't be accepted by the courts, to say it's the Chief Medical Officer's decision or it's the Prime Minister's decision. No. In law, it's the entire sole decision of the Minister for Health.
So in that case, does that mean that the Minister for Health has blood on his hands by that logic?
I think Mr. Slater, if he'd been a lawyer, might have taken it that way. But essentially, this is an ethical question. Does the government have a duty to save its own citizens? Because several thousand of them are in peril in India. And should we be sending flights to pick them up, to put them in quarantine and so on? And that's really the decision that one could express surprise that a Prime Minister who so promotes his religiosity yet seems to be unaware of the parable of the Good Samaritan, who, of course, and indeed the principle of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. These are principles that one would think would motivate a government, and yet we're acting like the bad Samaritan, turning a blind eye to Australian citizens in peril, with whom, if citizenship means anything, we have a duty to rescue.
One of the critiques is that this has been focused on people stuck in India who, many of them, of course, have Indian heritage, Australian citizens with Indian heritage, that the same kind of rules were not imposed on, if I can be blunt, people of Anglo-Saxon heritage from the United Kingdom or perhaps the United States. Do you see an inconsistency here too?
Well, I'm not going to go into that argument because I haven't seen all the evidence, but it certainly has concerned the Australian Human Rights Commission, who's called for clarity, and I think it should obviously be seriously considered. I'm not going to pass a view one way or another because I haven't seen all the evidence.
Has the role of the Chief Medical Officer been politicised?
Yes, I think this is a danger, and this is something that the Australian Medical Association should look at. Doctors who find themselves in Canberra bureaucracy have to be very careful that they're not exploited. And I think throughout the day, every minister I've seen on television has said it's all down to the Chief Medical Officer. We acted on his advice. Now, not only is that wrong in law, but it's wrong in principle. And I think the Chief Medical Officer made it clear that he didn't advise on the question of criminal penalties. And doctors who find themselves in that position have to confine their advice and make sure that they're not used as an excuse by politicians who have to take, hard it may be, but ultimately political decisions. This isn't a medical decision, it's a political decision. And it's no good for the Prime Minister to say, oh, we won't enforce the law. That's an extraordinary situation.
Should the government be trying to vaccinate Australians in India through our embassies and consulates?
The government should be trying to vaccinate people in Australia. It is one of the most extraordinary things coming home to find that the great Dr. Fauci's advice of last year, you can only get through this if you vaccinate, vaccinate, vaccinate. wasn't taken up. Even last year, somehow we ordered mostly the AstraZeneca vaccine, which was 20% less effective than the Pfizer vaccine. I've been fortunate enough to have it months ago, but of course, we might be lucky enough to get hold of it at the end of the year, which may mean next year. But the vaccine rollout has been appalling. So I think that the question of the government's competence in dealing with the pandemic is firstly in relation to ordering the right vaccine at the right time. And then, of course, I'm not saying people shouldn't. AstraZeneca is very good. You won't go to hospital if you take it, so you must. But getting such supplies as we can to India, we're not giving them any vaccines at the moment, but certainly we should offer that vaccination facility to Australians in India as part of our duty of care for our own citizens.
Are you surprised there haven't been more institutions speaking out against this travel ban?
I'm surprised at not hearing a word from the churches. I mean, we give churches massive tax dodgers. We give them extraordinary powers to educate privately children and so forth. And we expect that on ethical issues, church leaders will speak out. I haven't heard a single churchman speak out on what is essentially an ethical issue. Does the parable of the Good Samaritan have any resonance in the Australian Canberra today? And without suggesting that churches who were a damp squib when it came to the equal rights issues should have the last word. They should certainly, if they accept their role, and of course many bravely have done so in the past, but if they accept their role in society, they should speak out on this ethical issue.
Before I let you go, you are in quarantine yourself. How are you finding quarantine?
As many of my clients of solitary confinement. I'm guarded 24 hours a day by armed police. It's a waste of their time, a waste of taxpayers' money, because I'm fully Pfizered and I'm test negative. So I'm hardly a threat to anyone, nor is anyone else, except for those who have got the COVID. And so if we did what other countries do and limit the time in quarantine to 7 days, we'd halve the problem of overstocked quarantine hotels. And so that's a suggestion. Even 10 days is adequate. Another suggestion perhaps for the government to consider and adopt, because the present rule is unnecessary and wasteful.